Well, good evening. Thank you for coming out again. It's really a drag to try and have a Bible study if nobody shows up. It goes really fast, but it's not much fun. So I'm glad that you're here, glad that you weathered the storm, or the colder weather, the darkness, to come out, to be together. My challenge is to, in some way, reveal something that sparks some interest, that makes the stories other than just what you've always heard, to kind of put some pieces together and make some connections that will help stimulate your love of the book and the way Mark is telling the story, right? Mark is putting things together in such a way to help guide you to see beyond the obvious, what you already know. Now, as the reader, Mark has in the very beginning made the statement. He said, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He's made that statement. Now, for us as the reader, we have to ask, how are you going to show this? Essentially prove it to us. And so he begins with his stories of credibility. How do we understand Jesus's credibility to be what you say he is? And I've mentioned before that in Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel as well, they use different genealogies. They use different stories. Luke is the one from which we get most of our stories about the nativity, what we would take as our Christmas story. Although Matthew will use the story of Zechariah, the story of Zechariah and Elizabeth, John's birth, the proclamation, and so there's this build up to it and saying, here's the announcement. Mark doesn't do that. Mark jumps right in to the baptism story, to the story of John. And so we have to be asking, so how then is Mark going to reveal the credibility that Jesus is who he says he is? And he does that in the first section. And there are different sections, and each one builds upon itself. And you're going to see that. I'm hoping that we get that far. You're going to see that tonight about how it now begins to repeat itself, but now it ramps up. Everything begins to build momentum. What Mark is trying to do is trying to tell a story that just begins to pick up motion. It's kind of like, if you ever picked up a book and you read it, and maybe the first couple of chapters are kind of okay, but maybe by the third you're into it. And there's a point in a good novel that it hooks you. And now it picks up momentum. And now the narrative begins to take off. And now what the first chapter was setting the stage, but now it's a page turner. And that's what Mark is trying to do. And we want to look for those signs of do you see how this connects to that and how it cascades through? Okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to begin actually. I just want to set up the stage a little bit. We finished last time on chapter 3, so we're going to highlight some things in chapter 3, and then we're going to kind of hit right into chapter 4. All right, so let us begin with just a prayer, asking the Spirit of God to rest upon us and open our hearts and our minds to His Word. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, it's in this place, in this sanctuary, where we feel Your presence rest upon us. We have come to know more. We sit at Jesus' feet. We ask Him to teach us and to guide us, to reveal what we do not know, that we may become wiser, that we may become more at ease with being Your followers, that we can hear Your voice in the most subtle of circumstances, and that we can follow more faithfully. So teach us, we pray. Reveal to us what You would have us to know by the power of Your Spirit, that we could become all that You imagine us to be. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, one of the things that you always kind of want to do is not only look at the stories. Here's a story, okay? For example, we're starting in chapter 4, but I want to kind of back up then just a moment. But chapter 4 begins with the parable of the sower and the seed, right? You all know that story, right? I mean, most of you are familiar with its basic premise. But the question really is, why is it there? right? Of all the places Mark could have put that, why is it here? Why here? Why now? Those are the kind of questions we should be asking. Not only, we can look at a story and we say, okay, what does it teach us, right? If you've ever taught on the story of the sower and the seed, you might ask, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. You might ask, which of those metaphors best describes you, best describes the church? What do you think it is? And that's good and that's valuable. You can also say, but why did Mark include it here? What is it telling us about the story of Jesus' credibility? Right? Those are the kind of things that we want to know. So let's go back a little bit, if you will. Just back up just a little bit, and I'm just going to highlight this kind of stuff. Back in verse 20 of chapter 3, Jesus was doing some healings. When his family, Jesus is doing some healings, and the Pharisees come and they confront Jesus, and they're saying, wait a second, you must be Satan, right? Because you're doing your healings on the Sabbath. Now, these are religious leaders, right? And if you can think about the contrast, or if you will, how these things are in conflict. They're saying he's doing a great thing. He's healing people. Good thing. But then they say, but he must be evil. And you say, well, how does that doesn't work together. But you're religious people. You should know better. You should know better. Followed that up with, then right after this, Mark says, then even Jesus' mothers and brothers come. And they say, they're outside looking for you. Later, earlier in chapter 3, his mother and brothers come and say he's out of his mind. He's embarrassing the family by making all of this stir, by making these claims. We've come to get him. And at the end of chapter 3, his mother's there. They have come to see you. They're here to come get you. And Jesus redefines what it means to be the family of God. He said, these are my mother, my brothers. Now, in case you're thinking that Jesus is cutting his ties with his family, he doesn't. Because in John's gospel, Jesus says to John the beloved, he said, here is your mother, right? He still is taking care of his mother. He still recognizes that. But he's making a statement about what it means to be the family of God now. What does that mean? And he's redefining that for us. Okay, now, the point here is there's these conflicts. You might expect for Jesus what he's doing, the healings that he's doing. First of all, who would be on his side? We might say, well, the religious people, they should know. They should know what God is doing. The religious people, right? Church people, they should know. Well, his family, if anybody, his family should be supporting him, right? They're the ones that love him. And so if you're the reader or if you're Mark, you kind of go, why are people not picking this up? I mean, Jesus is healing, he's doing exorcisms, he's healing people. There are huge crowds. The crowds love him and they're following him. But people that should aren't. And so if you're the reader, you're kind of going, why do you think these people are not picking it up? Why do you think the crowds are loving this, are seeing this, and it says over and over again, and they are so amazed? Why are they getting it? But the people, the insiders, this is going to be important, the insiders are not. Right? So they tells this story, right? Now, again, chapter 4 begins that Jesus is always teaching at the lake. The lake is a source of strength. It is a source of his teaching environment. These are the people that he's teaching. A crowd gathers around him so large that he had to get into a boat. And he sat down and they were at the water's edge. So you get this imagination that he's sitting in a boat. He pushes back from the shore just a little bit so that the crowds don't overwhelm him, but that he can teach to a much larger audience. And he taught them, and he says, listen. He says, listen. This is the idea of, pay attention. What is about to come is significant. And he begins by teaching. This is one of the only a handful of parables. Luke uses a lot of teaching, a lot of parables to get through what Jesus is doing. Mark, not so much. This is one of the key ones, and so it's important. A parable is a story from everyday experiences that have deep spiritual significance so that you can enter into the story. It's actually a way of getting behind your defenses. If you were to talk to somebody about theology, they would wrestle with it and they say, well, what about this? I don't understand that. And you might use difficult language. By telling a story of the sower and the seed, everybody's going, oh yeah, I know what he's talking. But now it says, now look at your life from that perspective. It changes your perspective. So he calls to attentiveness this idea of the focus of the sower and the seed. Okay? So he goes out, a farmer went out to sow seed, and as he scattered the seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Now other seed fell on thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear grain. Still other seeds fell on good soil. It came up and grew and produced a crop, multiplying 30, 60, even 100 times. Then Jesus said, whoever has ears, let him hear. Now, you might think that the disciples who are following, now this is unique to Mark. You might think that the disciples, and by that I'm talking about the 12 that are following, they are the insiders. Jesus is pouring himself into the 12. And so you might expect that the 12 would kind of understand what's going on. When he was alone, the 12 and others around him asked him about the parables. And he told them, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. And then Jesus says, don't you understand this parable? Now, initially, it may sound very much like Jesus is taking the wisdom of the kingdom and putting it away that people are not going to get. They are going to be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they will turn and be forgiven. Now, this is a reference then to several key passages in the Old Testament. And you can either write this down let me ask. I'll try and get some people to read. Can I get somebody to read Ezekiel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2? Just raise your hand if you'll read it. That way I can move. Okay, Pearl will read that one. Can I get somebody to read Jeremiah 5, 20 to 21? Okay, thank you. And somebody to read Isaiah 6, 9 through, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't even finish, did I? Isaiah 6, 9 through 10. So here, Jesus is referring back to Old Testament prophets to understand what we're talking about. So if you read this just as is, it would make it seem like Jesus is saying, I'm telling it this because they're never going to get it. The outsiders are not going to get this. The insiders will. But you have to be careful what you think an insider or an outsider really is. That's the purpose of this parable for the disciples. Okay? So, Pearl was reading Ezekiel 12, 1 through 2.
Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, you dwell in the midst of a rebellious house, which has eyes to see but does not see, and ears to hear but does not hear, for they are a rebellious house.
Yeah, that's good. So the point is why, according to that passage, why do they not hear and why do they not see?
They're rebellious.
They're a rebellious people. They don't want to hear. Okay? They don't. Now, we're going to come back to that, because it's going to be very important. Linda was going to read Jeremiah 5:20-21. 20-21. Jeremiah 5:20 and 21.
Announce this to the house of Jacob and proclaim it in Judah. Hear this, you foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but do not see, who have ears but do not hear.
Okay. Now, in Jeremiah, again, this is the Lord speaking. He's talking about foolish and senseless people. That we have. It's kind of saying you have eyes, but you're not really looking. I mean, and you have ears, but you're not really listening. Okay. Isaiah. Rick was going to do Isaiah 6:9-10.
Isaiah's new commission, he said, "Go and tell his people, but ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their ears dull, close their eyes, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed."
Okay, which is essentially what Jesus is saying in Mark's gospel. Okay, now, here's the point. We could talk about the parable itself, right? The seed is the Word of God. That the Word of God gets broadcast all around. It is universal. All people have access to it, but not all people are receptive to it. Not all people are ready for it. So when we talk about, like, well, why are the Pharisees rejecting this? Why are his family coming to get him? Because they're not receptive to this yet. They're not ready for it yet. And so when it talks about making the heart callous, it makes it sound like, that God is working on them so that they will not receive it. What God is doing, what Jesus here is really talking about, is giving you a choice. One of the things that we mentioned this morning, right? That fundamental value between choice and consequences, right? To understand that they exist. And by doing nothing is in itself a choice, right? And that choice has consequences. And what Jesus is saying, and what he'll say over and over again, is by doing that, you become callous. Now, if you go back in the story of Exodus, if you remember, that every time Moses would go in and he would say, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh would say, "Okay, you can go, just stop the plague that we've got." And the plague would stop, and Moses would say, "Okay." The plague would stop, and then it would say, and God hardened his heart. And I've often heard people say, well, why would God do that? Why would God intentionally harden his heart? It's like, that's not what, that God worked against his will. But what God is doing is saying, you have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. And by making that decision over and over again, you become more likely to make it in the future. You become hardened in your position. You become hardened in your beliefs. You can't, if you ever had little children, you can't make me do that. You become hardened and you become callous. So that when they're looking for a change, whether you're a Pharisee or whatever it is, you now have become hardened in that position. And what Jesus here is trying to say is, or what Mark is trying to say is, if you've gotten to this point saying, why are people not buying into this? I mean, they're able to see what Jesus is doing because their preconceived ideas of what the Messiah is blocking their ability. And you're going to see that throughout Mark's gospel. As a matter of fact, what Mark is going to do is saying the disciples are insiders. Right? They're the ones that Jesus is pouring himself into, and yet you're going to see over and over again, they're the ones that are the most confused. they're the ones that are not picking it up because their preconceived idea of what it means to be a disciple or what the Messiah is so skewed that they can't see it for themselves. And it's wonderful the way Mark draws that out. You'll see this in triads. You'll see this over and over again, particularly with boat narratives. Okay? So he goes on to say, okay, don't you understand this? This is where now Jesus is going to make the disciples insiders. He's going to explain it. He says, the farmer goes out, the farmer sows the word, and some people are like seeds along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that is sown in them. Others are like seeds sown on rocky places. They hear the word at once and they receive it at joy, but they have no roots. They last only a short time. They don't do the work. When the trouble comes and persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still, others are like seeds sown among thorns. They hear the word, but worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires of other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others are like seed sown on good soil. They hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. Now, notice what Mark is doing. He's driving that point home, or what Jesus is doing. He said, first of all, they're good soil. They hear it. They accept it. And it does its work. Now, he doesn't just say, it's good soil and it produces. They have to do the work. By the same token, those that don't are choked out. There are things, the worries of this life, right? What is he saying? I mean, he's driving these three things home. The deceitfulness of wealth and the desires of other things choke it out. Mark does things in triads, right? So if it's good soil, it hears it, it accepts it, and it puts it into practice. And it produces. And then of course, the concept of 30, 60, and 100 is just trying to say, it is going to be so much more than what you could imagine. You plant one, for every one seed that you have, you get 100 times that. For every field that you plant, you're going to get 100 times that field. It's beyond anything that you can imagine. It isn't trying to say economically this is going to be good for you. It's just trying to say it's over the top. And then he compares this. There are two different things called a synonymous parallelism and antithetical parallelism. And both of them kind of go through the same process. He said to them, do you bring out a lamp and put it under a bowl or a bed? Instead, don't you put it on a stand? For what is hidden is meant to be disclosed, and whatever is concealed is meant to be brought out into the open. If anyone has ears, let him hear. Now, when he tells the parable of the sower and the seed, he says, listen. In this one, he tells the story, and he said, listen, pay attention, listen to what I'm saying. This goes beyond just the narrative. There's much more that is happening here. And what it's saying is, whatever as the kingdom comes in, it's going to reveal what is so far hidden. And now, what we have to be asking is, what is it going to reveal? And the core here is the difference between who are the insiders, right? Jesus has poured himself into the disciples. He picked them. But he's also pulling them off to the side. They're like going, do you not get this parable? Okay, come on over here and let me explain it to you. Right? So they're insiders, but they're still not getting it. They're still not quite there. He goes on to talk about consider carefully. Now this is the essence of what he's trying to say. This is what's known as antithetical parallelism. He says, now consider carefully what you are listening to. With the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. This is a common phrase that is used in ancient Israel. It's basically what we would say is what goes around comes around. What you apply will be applied to you, right? How you choose to live is how you will be known. Whoever has will be given more. Whoever does not have, Even what he has will be taken from him. On the outside, that sounds kind of harsh. Even what you have will be taken from you. Essentially, what it's meaning is if you're not going to take what Jesus says, if you're not going to take that seed, if you're not going to accept it, if you're not going to apply it, the seed will go away. Even what you have will decline. Even what you have will be removed. And again, this is going back to this idea, you will then become hardened. If you choose not to be a part of the kingdom, over time, each choice, every decision that you make is converting you into one kind of person or another. Every decision, every day, is moving you in one direction or another. The decisions that you have on a daily basis, the little nudgings that God gives you, are creating you into one kind of person or another. And so what he's saying is, whoever has, even what little you have, more will be given to you. Now, he's not talking about wealth or power. He's talking about character. But he said, even if you don't, whoever does not have the desire for the kingdom, even what you have, even what little joy you have, will be taken from you. Now, Jesus is not saying that God's going to reach down and say, I'm going to take that from you. He's just saying over time, the hardness of your heart will overwhelm you because you cannot remain static. You cannot just kind of go, I'm just going to pick up my feet and go with the flow. It doesn't work that way. Jesus is trying to reveal what this is really all about. Now, the next parable is a parable that is unique to Mark's gospel. And again, what you're trying to say is, why does Mark put it here? Why does Mark tell you this story, and why does he put it here? What is it trying to do? Right following immediately after this idea of even what you have will be taken from you. Mark then says, look, I know this is hard to grasp. And Mark says, look, this is what it's like. The kingdom of God is like a man that scatters seed on the ground. Now, right? We just did the sower and the seed. But he's talking about something different. He said, night and day, whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and it grows, though he does not know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, and then the full head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts a sickle to it because the harvest has come. What Jesus here is trying to tell, or what Mark is trying to say, is there is a natural flow to the living order, that the kingdom is not a philosophy, like, that we can sit here and debate, what does it mean to be free and what does it mean to choose? He's saying it's a living thing. It's something that willfully comes out, and we get to choose, and we get to allow it to continue to grow. But it follows a process, right? The kingdom does not just come to you as today is the harvest. It comes and it continues to grow if you are willing to nurture it. And he says, you may not know how it's working. You may not be able to explain, well, how is the kingdom working in my life? How is it working in our community or in this church? But it is working, and God is bringing it to fruition. He then goes on to talk about the mustard seed. And the key with the mustard seed is the image of, if you looked at the mustard seed, and many of you know what I'm talking about, the concept of a mustard seed. It's a real tiny thing. You would never guess, if somebody showed you that little speck and says, tell me what is in that speck? What is in there? How in the world would you ever look at a mushroom, not a mushroom, sorry, at a mustard or any tree? I always think of looking at an apple seed, all right? Somebody once said, only God can see the apples that are already in that apple seed, right? That concept, and that's what he's saying. He's saying, when you look at it, you just see a seed, you see a nothing. You see a tiny seed. But when God sees it, He sees the tree and he sees all of the fruit that it could ever produce. That's the difference. That's what's holding the people back. What he's trying to say is his family and the Pharisees, they can only see the seed. But for everybody else, they're seeing the possibilities, right? So that's what he's trying to talk about.
It's really magnificent. I don't know what the word might be. The other writers are writing history,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
He's not writing history.
Right.
He's writing the future.
He's writing, yes. And he's trying to pull you along with him. He's trying to draw you in.
That's really powerful. That's powerful.
Because what he's trying to do is we're readers. You know, if we're reading this for the first time, we're kind of going, I'm not sure where this is going yet. And what he's saying is, that's, if you will, Jesus is trying to show you the seed and trying to reveal that there's more behind it. And what he's done so far is he's saying, what Jesus is doing is he's coming to give you an undeniable choice. You can't be neutral with if you really understand what Jesus is doing. If you're reading what he does, if you understand what he does, and I've talked about this before, right? I mean, I think I said this a couple of weeks ago with C.S. Lewis, right? He's either a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord. You have to choose. But by doing nothing is in itself a choice. And what Jesus here is saying is that choice has consequences. It will harden you in ways that you do not know, to the point where you can no longer see and you can no longer hear. There's a really, it often gets overlooked in Matthew's gospel. Jesus is teaching, and he's talking to the crowds, and he's teaching them, and he says, come follow, come follow me. And a young man says, I can't, I have to go bury, I think I have to go bury my father or somebody in my family. And Jesus said, let the dead bury their own dead. Now, the reason that that's powerful is because Jesus is saying, they're already dead. They just don't know it yet. That it's possible to become so hardened and so calloused that they can know. That was the damnation of Pharaoh. Pharaoh had hardened his heart, even despite all of the plagues, all of the miracles, everything that was happening. He could not let go of his own power. Nothing would let them go until the death of the firstborn. And of course, that's going to get us back to Easter as well. Okay, now, that brings us to the end of a key section, right? Up until this point, this is what has been known as the Galilean ministry, Jesus' Galilean ministry. It's the opening stanza, if you will, of trying to introduce who Jesus is. And all of the miracles that have been happening are impressive. And they've grown so much that when Jesus comes, he has to get into a boat and pull back from the shore in order to teach. But now we begin to ramp it up. And every time it ramps up, there is always a boat scene. The boat scenes in these times are opportunities for things to kind of elevate another notch, right? And you're going to see that. Every time there's a boat moment, a crossing, and there are going to be 3 of them. Every time there's a boat moment with the disciples, and what I mean is there's going to be an interaction of the disciples on the boat, right? And you're going to see that here in a minute. Whenever that happens, expect things to kick up a notch. They're now kicked up a notch, and you're going to see that, right? All right, so Jesus has just finished teaching, and it says, now that day, it was still the same day, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go to the other side. Now, where are they? Anybody want to guess where they are now? This will become important here in a little bit. They're pretty much up by Capernaum. They're up on the northern end of the lake. They are on the Jewish side of things, right? And that's going to become important here in a little bit. Let us go over to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was. Now, if you ever talk to Betty Ball, Betty that's always plagued her. She said, I always wanted to know, what do you mean, just as he was? And basically, a lot of the commentators just say it was the same day he was teaching, and just on the same day, without rest, they just said, okay, we're in the boat, let's just cross over to the other side of the lake. So they took him just as he was. And there were also other boats with him, and a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion, and the disciples woke him and said, Teacher, don't you care if we drowned? Now, one of the keys here is that makes many people, this is why most people feel that Mark is the oldest of the Gospels, because it gives us details about Jesus' life, about his feelings, that the other Gospel writers choose to eliminate. And they often feel that as stories are told and retold, as they're written down and passed on, a lot of the descriptive character is eliminated, not added onto. You don't add just at a whim more detail than was really there originally. So that, for example, when it says, it's kind of completely, it just adds character to the story, but it tells us that Jesus was asleep in the stern on a cushion, right? So you get this visual image of Jesus just being completely exhausted. They're out in the sea, the boat's just rocking all over the place, there's a storm, but he is totally at peace, right? But the disciples, right? Now remember, these are the insiders. These are the people that Jesus has pulled aside. Then they said, don't you care if we drowned? So he got up, he rebuked the wind and the waves, and he said, be quiet, be still. And the winds died down, and it was completely calm. Now, this is why this brings to close the first subsection of his Galilean ministry. And I told you that what happens is, in Mark's gospel, he wants to put before you, the reader, certain statements and said, now, what are you going to make of this? Now that you've heard all of this, now that this has happened, he said to his disciples, to you, right, you insiders, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Jesus is coupling our fear, our anxiety, with our lack of faith. Why don't you have faith? And we have to ask, for you, what does that mean to have faith? You know, to have confidence. You still don't have any confidence in me, do you? And they were terrified, primarily at his power. And here's the question, right? Mark wants to lay this before the reader. Okay, given all that we've talked about, given all of the miracles, given all the stuff that he said, who is this? Who do you think this is? Is this the Messiah you thought it was going to be? This is something different that we haven't seen before. This isn't a great, if you don't mind, this is not a great military leader. This isn't a political, somebody that's very politically savvy. But anybody that can get up and calm the winds what does that mean? What do you think's going on here? Even the winds and the waves obey him. Okay, so now we're crossing the sea, and things are about to kick up a notch. Now the demon possessions are going to go to another level, and we're going to see that. Right? So now they go to, it says, then they crossed across the lake, and they came to the Gerasenes. Now the Gerasenes are in southern, they're in the Decapolis, they're at the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. So essentially, what they've done is they've crossed diagonally down to the southern part of the Sea of Galilee. And they are now in the Decapolis. And the Decapolis is what kind of, do you know what kind of territory? 10 cities. Yes, it stands for the 10 cities. But what kind of a region is it? And it's our, just say we're not here to read your mind. It's Gentile territory. So Jesus has now left the Jewish enclave and all that means, and he's now gone into Jewish territory, into the Decapolis. All right? So now think about this for a moment. All of a sudden, we've now gone to another region. Now we've left, right? I thought the Messiah was for the Jews, right? Well, now he's going, I wonder what in the world is he going to do in the Gentiles? What's he going to do? And not only what's he going to do, but why is he going to do it? Now, and again, look at how this progresses. These are intentional. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tomb to meet him. So the evil spirit is coming now to him. This is now a confrontation that Jesus is having in the Gerasenes. The man lived in the tombs. Now, and again, look at how descriptive he is of this man's demonic, of this world. This is the world of the Gentiles. This man lived in the tombs. No one could bind him anymore, not even a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stone. Mark is saying, is there any more pathetic, demonic? Here is a human being that nobody, we've tried. If you will, we've used all of our best techniques to help this guy. There's nothing we can do. He lives in the tombs. He lives in an unclean place. These are unclean people. They're living among the dead. He cries out. He is in agony. As you hear this, do you have any compassion? Right? Mark is saying, do you have any compassion for this at all? Right now, I granted, he's Gentile, so maybe, but do you not have any compassion for him? That's what he's trying to get across. He's trying to drive in. Look at what look at what he's doing. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and he fell on his knees. Right? This is an act of submission. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want from me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Right? Now, right? He knows his name, but he's a Gentile, and he's got demon-possessed, and yet he knows his name. Swear to God that you won't torture me. Now, in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 8, he tells the same story. But Luke also says, and whatever you do, don't throw us into the abyss. Right? Luke brings out the abyss. Mark talks about, do not torture me. And Jesus says, come out of this man, you evil spirit. Now, it then says, then Jesus asked his name. Now, in ancient times, if you knew somebody's name, if you could call them by their name, it was the idea that you had a certain amount of power over them because you knew who they were. You had some familiarity with their person. That's why whenever the demon comes, he said, I know who you are. What will you do with me? Jesus, I know who you are, the Son of the Most High God. This is the idea of trying to get the upper hand. I know who you are. And then he pleads, don't torture me. Because I know you, I get the upper hand. And Jesus says, now you tell me, what is your name? He said, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, Legion is a military term given to the size. Now, oftentimes it is not really clarified here how many, for we are many. Right? We are a large number of demons. Now, do you see that at the very beginning of Mark's gospel, there is a healing of a man with a demon at the very beginning in the synagogue, right? And there's one, and Jesus heals him and says, don't say anything, right? This is important. Don't tell anybody. Don't say anything, because I don't want your opinion of me. I don't want a demon's opinion of me. Don't say anything. Go away. Now he crosses to the Gerasene, and there's one with thousands. One man. And part of what Mark is saying is it is overwhelming. And he does the same kind of thing. Now it is a legion. There are so many more. And they beg Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. Yeah.
Kind of reference for point, because when it says legion, the Roman legion is 2,000, so the big is 3,500.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit later, it said that 2,000 pigs ran into the lake.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, and that's true. I mean, we're talking about that certainly has the potential. The concept is that we're making a transition from earlier part of Mark's gospel, where there was one demon. You say, well, that's kind of, that's impressive. But now there are thousands. And just like that, they have to obey. But they begged him, do not send us out of the area. And Luke says, do not send us into the abyss. Our time has not yet come. So they understand both the ability of Jesus to torture as well as to send them into the abyss. But it goes on to say, there was a large herd of pigs feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. He gave them the permission. The evil spirits came out, went into the pigs, and the herd was about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Okay, so you kind of like, what'd you get out of that? First of all, the concept is, right, for the reader, of the demons went into the unclean pig. They were unclean, they went into the unclean. And then they were drowned. Then they just killed themselves. The animals had no self-control, and they rushed into the lake, and they were drowned. Now, part of the reason that then Mark includes this is that, again, what Mark is trying to get across to us in this section is the power of choice. Jesus makes you choose. He doesn't leave you neutral. You can't just say, well, that was cool. You have to make a choice. Every time you encounter an experience like this, you have to make a choice. And so we're going to look at the impact of this choice and how Jesus deals with it. Now, those who were attending the pigs ran off, and they reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people came out to see what had happened. Now, when they came to see Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Okay, so here's your choice. Here you have a person who has been demon-possessed, if you will, his whole life. And Mark goes through great detail. He was chained. He cried out at night. He lived among the dead. He was an outcast. He had no companionship. You get that image. And now here he is. He's healthy. On the other side of the equation, you have economic loss. Right? I mean, 2,000 pigs is still 2,000 pigs. What's more important to you? What decision will you have to make? How do you make these decisions? These are the choices. Right? This is the same choice that we were having with the Pharisees. Because the Pharisees were saying, why are you healing? You have a healing guy. You healed him, his hands, and the lame person, but you did it on the Sabbath. You didn't follow the rules. Which one is more important to you? It's about a choice, right? So what happens? They are afraid, and the people began to plead for Jesus to leave the region. We cannot bear the economic loss. Now, this is the fascinating part. Remember, we're in Gentile territory. As Jesus was getting into the boat, because they said, hey, get out of here. right? The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. I want to be your disciple. But Jesus did not let him, but he said to him, go to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. What happened to the messianic secrecy? What happened to it? Why is it not here?
Seeds started getting planted elsewhere because down the road, the Gentiles would be brought into the church.
Gentiles would be brought into the church. But you're going to see in a little bit, Jesus goes back to the messianic. What makes this area unique? Why here? Gentile. See, here's the thing. When he's in Capernaum, or when he's on that side of the railroad tracks, if you will, they have an idea in their mind, right? And this is what he's trying to talk about. They have a preconceived idea of what the Messiah should do. The Messiah should restore Israel to its glory the way David did. He should kick out the Romans from the temple. He should reestablish the synagogue. That's what we expect. And when he does healing in the Jewish side, he said, look, don't tell people what you know, because what you know is not clear yet. But when he goes to the Gentile side, they do not have that preconceived idea. He said, go tell people that the Lord had mercy on you.
They have worshipped numerous gods.
That's right.
They have worshipped numerous gods, whereas back there, they only worshipped one.
They only worshipped one, but they also had the other thing is they had a preconceived idea of what faith was. Then Jesus said, you're so off base, don't tell anybody. The Gentiles are not going to make up like, he was representing Baal or something. He said, go tell your family that the Lord has done great things for you. And that's all that he knows. And so that he goes. So Jesus is now saying, go tell people, go tell your family that the Lord has healed you. That there's something different that is a move in the land. And so he goes back out and he begins to tell everybody. And all of the people, now you're actually going to, what's interesting is later on we're going to come back and we're going to see the effects of this man's witness later on. That area is now going to be aware of what Jesus is doing, and they're going to have an effect. Okay, now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through it, or maybe we'll get as far as we can. Before we got to go, and then we'll come back to it perhaps next time. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. So now Jesus is leaving for the very first time. He was in Gentile territory, and now he's going to cross over and go back to the Jewish side. And so when he goes back to the Jewish side, it's going to reinstate the messianic secrecy. So that when he comes back there, things are going to happen. He said, don't tell people. As Jews, don't tell people because you're going to get it wrong. Right? So he's going to talk about that. Now, the first one is, when Jesus crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake. Now, this is not a boat narrative. This is just, I'm crossing over. There's going to be 3 boat events, where Jesus is walking on the water. That's kind of a boat event. And you're going to see these throughout Mark's gospel. One of the synagogue rulers, named Jairus, came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet. Okay, do you see the parallel between Jairus, a synagogue ruler, and the man that had demon-possessed in the Gentile area? Both of them come to see Jesus. When Jesus gets off the boat, they come and they approach Jesus. They have a crisis. Both of them fall at his feet. They fall earnestly, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed." So Jesus went with him. Okay. Now, this, right now, if you've read ahead, if you kind of know where we're going with this, if you remember at the beginning of Mark's gospel, how this unfolds, there is a demonic healing. There's one guy, demonic healing in the synagogue. And then they go for the, if you will, for the afternoon to Peter's house and heal Peter's mother-in-law who's sick. Now it's ramped up. Now there's an exorcism of thousands. And there's going to be a healing of Jairus' daughter who's going to have died. So now, right, the healings have now ramped up even more significant. And the more it increases, the more it gets ramped up, the more the conflict is going to get ramped up as well. Now this is also, and we're trying to get through this, and if I go too fast, let me know. But this is also what is known as intercalation. You're going to see an intercalation, a classic event. And what it is there's two stories told at the same time. There's the story where Jairus comes and says, "Jesus, I'm going to fall at his feet." Like, this is a synagogue ruler who is now falling at his feet because he is desperate for his little girl. And he's trying as the reader to try and get you to understand, do you have that sympathy? Do you understand? Can you enter into what Jairus is going through? And Jesus said, "Yes, I will come. I'm going to come to your house." Right? Along the way, another story happens. A large crowd was pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Make a mental note of that. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Everything that we try to do only is making her worse. And of course, because she's got this disease or she's got this bleeding affliction, she is an outcast. She is unclean. She is always unclean wherever she goes. And here's the thing, in order to touch her would make whoever touches her unclean as well. When she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I touch his clothes, I will be healed. There's something about him. I believe that if I touch him, because here's the key. She's taking a huge risk. If she's wrong and she reaches out and touches him as a rabbi, what has she done to him? That's not okay. That's not okay. If you go up to somebody and you make them unclean, she is taking a huge, huge risk. That's exactly faith. I believe. Right? Now, what she knows is not clear. If I touch his clothes, I will be healed. Now, right, here's Mark. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Not that it was cured, right? And that's true, but she was freed. She was liberated. Right? Mark wants to use that language. She is now liberated. That's what Jesus does. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out of him. She did not infect him, he infected her. Mark wants you to see the direction of the power. Jesus is trying, when we gather in worship and we take communion and we watch back, Jesus is trying to infect you. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And of course, right, the disciples are like, they're inside, they're like, what a dumb thing to say. Everybody's jostling around. Yes, but not everybody there was there for faith. Maybe they wanted to see a show. Maybe they wanted to see a spectacle. Maybe they wanted to, in that culture, maybe they wanted to see a celebrity. She wanted healing. She had the faith in that moment. And power went in the direction, always flows in the direction of faith. You see the crowd around you, the disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? Jesus kept looking around to see who did it, and the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear because of the power that had just entered through her, told him the whole truth. Now, he says, now this is important. This is going to become important. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Right? He doesn't say, hey woman, hey Jew, whatever, whatever, hey Martha, whatever it is. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead. They said, why bother the teacher anymore? You got to love, this is one of those great phrases. Ignoring what they said, Jesus went to the synagogue ruler. Don't be afraid, just believe. What Mark is doing is saying, why can't you be like that woman? Now, again, enter in the significance of these two stories. And I'm sorry if I'm going over, but I'm on a roll, so tough. First of all, and I don't mean this in a bad way, women had very low status. They were not significant. And a little girl, children were even of lower significance. So the fact that these stories are first about a woman that comes and gets healed, and he says, daughter. Right? And then a little girl has it's like, okay, what's the big deal, right? I mean, because they did not have a lot of significance because life expectancy wasn't huge. But Jesus ignores them and said, no, Jairus, you are a synagogue ruler. For you, the reader, why can't you have the same faith that she had? Right? Jesus is pointing to her, just believe. Don't be afraid, right? Because the woman comes to Jesus with fear and trembling. They said, your faith has made you well. And he says, Jairus, why can't you have faith like that? Just believe. Now, he did not let anyone follow him except, again, here you're going to see with Mark that inner circle. Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And they went into the home of the synagogue ruler, and Jesus saw a commotion. There were people crying and wailing loudly. Now, oftentimes in those times, they would actually hire mourners in order to show the importance. And what Jairus has and what you're going to see, Jairus has done is he'd hired people to kind of mourn for his daughter. And the reason that we know that is Jesus comes in. Jesus went in and he said, why all the commotion? Why are you guys fussing? The child is not dead, but asleep. And they laughed at him. Now, if this were really your child, if you were really emotionally engaged in the death of this child, do you think if somebody said, they're not dead, they're sleeping, do you think laughter would come to you easily in that situation? But they just kind of turned the emotion and said, look, we're paying for our money. We're supposed to put in 2 hours here. This is just, I don't know what you think you're doing, right? So they laughed at him, right? They laughed at what Jesus was trying to do, right? This rabbi. People did not understand. And when they put him out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and they went into the child where the child was. He took her by the hand and said, Talitha cum, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately, there's that word, the little girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. Now, how long had the woman had her disease? Right. He's connecting the two together. This is what intercalation does. They modify or they amplify each other. Both of them were female. When the woman is healed by the energy flowing into her body, he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. When Jairus' daughter is healed from the dead, he said, and she was 12 years old, she got up and they were completely astonished, and he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, right? We're back to our messianic secrecy. Because if you will, for you Jews, you're thinking that the Messiah I'm just here to do miracles for you. I'm just a miracle worker. That's going to change, right? That's going to change. If you just tell what has happened here and say, that's what he does. He does a show for us. You're going to miss the point. So we're back on the Jewish side, and he says, here you have this little girl that is resurrected from the dead, and he said, don't tell anybody because you don't have the whole picture. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and then told them to give her something to eat. The idea of giving her something to eat is this image of she's completely restored. This isn't like, well, maybe she is, she's in a coma or something. She is now fully vibrant, alive, eating, living abundantly. Right? And so you begin to see that what Mark is doing is building Jesus' case. Now, we're going to stop right there because I've gone over significantly. What happens in the beginning of Mark's, and I'm trying to put this together if I can, right? We've kind of gone through these different stages. What happens in the beginning of Mark's gospel is then what happens is the calling of the disciples, right? Calling them, come follow me, calling Peter, James, and John from the boats, the calling of Matthew. What's going to begin happening in chapter 6 is now the disciples, we're going to go back to the disciples, but we're now going to send them out. We've called them in, we're ramping everything up, but now we have to send them back out. Now we're going to send them out to begin to teach and to show what discipleship really means. It isn't just following Jesus. It isn't just watching and kind of being his bodyguards. Okay, now I need you to go back out. And so what's going to happen in this next section is, what does discipleship mean? What does it mean to be the Messiah, to follow? Is it just watching miracles happen, or is it something more? What more is Jesus inviting us to understand? And again, we're hearing this from Peter's perspective. Peter is kind of giving us this we were mistaken at the beginning. We thought this was a show. And it was only until later that we understood how little we understood about what he was doing. And that's going to come in the next couple of chapters. Okay? All right. Hey, thank you. Sorry I took so long. Hopefully you got something out of it. But I'll see you next time.